No end in sight to the largest man-made disruption to the global economy in recent human history. Markets today resuming their plunge. The Dow down about 1,000 points. The sell-off gaining steam after the White House said goods from China would be subject to a 145% tariff rate. That's higher than what Trump had said yesterday, when he said that that rate would be 125%. Essentially, markets spent yet another day trapped between what Donald Trump says he's doing and what his administration says he means when he says what he's doing. Brand new reporting by the New York Times reveals why this keeps happening and just how isolated Donald Trump is from any semblance of a policy process in his own administration. The New York Times reports this, quote, many of Trump's most senior advisors and officials were unaware of this major shift in policy until the last minute, because as recently as Wednesday morning, Trump was still indicating he was sticking to his previous plan, driving his sudden reversal, his fear that he and he alone would drive the world into an historic financial crisis. New York Times reports this, quote, the economic turmoil, particularly a rapid rise in government bond yields, caused Mr. Trump to blink on Wednesday afternoon and pause his reciprocal tariffs for most countries for the next 90 days. It left his aides scrambling to somehow try to spin the reversal as a win.
We've had more than 75 countries contact us, and I imagine after today there will be more. So it is just a processing problem.
If I could just add to what the secretary said, many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here.
We missed the art of the deal. Okay. Stephen Miller went even further, though, than that. He said this, quote, you have been watching the greatest economic master strategy from an American president in history, end quote. Hours later, Trump admitted that it wasn't a master strategy at all. He admitted on camera that he was reversing course because of the markets.
Can you walk us through what you were thinking about why you decided to put a 90-day pause?
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, you know. They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid.
Markets were getting more than a little bit yippy, though. By Tuesday, Trump had wiped out $10 trillion in wealth in just a few short days. And it was what his team was fearing. The Times reports this, quote, behind the scenes, senior members of Trump's team had feared a financial panic that could spiral out of control and potentially devastate the economy, end quote. On Sunday, Bessent made a direct plea to Trump. Times goes on, quote, Mr. Bessent advised the president to focus on negotiating with other countries, saying Trump is the most adept negotiator there is. But he also stressed that Trump needed to articulate the end game of his plan because the markets needed more certainty. The president apparently absorbed only part of Bessent's message. On Monday morning, he drafted a Truth Social post to say talks were going to take place with countries. He changed it to say that they would negotiate. By Monday afternoon, he told reporters, quote, virtually every country wants to negotiate. There still was no coherent expression about the end game. Did the president want to use the levies as a negotiating tactic to cut better deals for the U.S., or was he intent on leaving them in place as a blunt instrument to raise revenues and force manufacturing back to the United States? 3 days later, the answer to those questions remains unclear to everyone. When he was asked about how he would decide his next moves, particularly exemptions on tariffs, he said this, quote, instinctively, Donald Trump's manufactured volatility continuing to fuel a market crash is where we start again today with CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Liesman. Steve, what is happening?
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to go back to my appearance on this show yesterday where I said that the announcement by the president was far less than it appeared to the market. And I think what happened is the market has come to that conclusion. That what happened was the president took off some of the reciprocal tariffs, but left a whole bunch of tariffs on and cranked up that tariff, as you correctly reported, on China to 145%. Well, what did that mean? It left us with tariffs that were not only just a little bit below where they previously had been. And I'll give you the numbers one more time here. We had tariffs of 3%. We went up to 30% under the president, and now maybe they're like 25%. So we still have the highest tariffs, or you want to call it one of the biggest tax increases in American history here. And that has not gone away. And so what happened is people lowered their forecasts, but didn't do away with their forecast for lower growth and higher inflation, which puts the Federal Reserve in this pickle here of they don't know what to do or how to respond. Nicole, what's going on broadly here, I hate to say this, is both American investors and global investors are selling America. And what does that mean? It means that everything that America produces right now in terms of financial assets are lower. Bonds are lower, the dollar is lower, and as you know, stocks are lower. You guys over there in the political department, you have an election every 2 or 4 years. We have an election every day here in the stock market, and the incumbent's been on a losing streak.
Tell me how psychologically impactful this week is in terms of the markets and the leaders and the movers seeing Donald Trump differently than they did 10 days ago.
Well, you know, you pointed out yesterday, and I took that as an interest advisedly, this notion that maybe there was some flexibility on the part of the president. And I responded to you, and we can go back and forth on this, that it is interesting. There was flexibility, but look at what it took to get him to be flexible. So I'm not sure how much solace you take from that particular development. Psychologically, well, first of all, you want to start to talk about financially. There are deep losses out there. There are potentials for margin call. And as we also discussed, there are losses and concerns within the financial system that seem to be a little bit better today. I need to report in terms of that. But there are still losses out there. And psychologically, what we're hearing is that all of this uncertainty freezes households from spending and it freezes businesses from investing. People will figure out how to get through this if they knew what the rules are. But again, we have this 90-day problem that there's going to be things negotiated. We don't know. It is maybe important. The president said that 10% across the board tariff could be negotiable. I think he said depending upon what's offered. But it is really hard to plan, hard to forecast. These forecasts aren't right always. Sometimes they're almost always wrong, but they give you a baseline to figure out where the future is going. It is very hard in a fog. I will tell you, one Fed official said, this is the kind of fog you don't keep driving with your lights on and your wipers on. This is the kind of fog where you pull over, you put on your hazards, and you stop driving.
Well, then let's stick with the, I'm from San Francisco, so I love a good fog analogy. What happens when all the consumers do that, right? I mean, we're the consumers and what's on the shelves at Walmart is unchanged by any of it. Maybe flexibility was a wrong word. Maybe a lack of permanence is a better way to describe any position Trump takes. But what happens when the tariffs, the policy that the markets are still reacting badly to, which keep going up? Not only did they not come down, they've gone up 3 times since Monday. What happens when the consumers weigh in by not buying things?
Well, that's a real effect. There's 2 impacts here. One is what we call the wealth effect. People will spend some percentage of their increase in wealth in the stock market. They think it's about 5 cents on the dollar. It matters less with lower and poor income people. It matters a lot more with rich people who tend to drive spending in this country. So that's a direct financial effect. Then there's the sentiment numbers. The sentiment numbers can lead to declines in spending, but people can also look through it. Look, we should also count some of the things we have going for us. Still relatively low unemployment. You still have decent incomes, and those incomes over the past year have been rising faster than the inflation rate. We got a good inflation report this morning. We've had relatively good growth over the past several quarters. So we go into this turmoil in reasonably good shape. Consumers have the ability to keep spending if they want to keep spending. The trouble is when they get nervous about their jobs, if they think they're going to lose their jobs, they may stop spending, they may stop extending out on credit and those sorts of things. So the psychological effect can have a real economic effect or financial effect.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We've got some big news at this hour. The Supreme Court has unanimously ruled against the Trump administration in a case regarding a Maryland man that the administration wrongfully arrested and deported to an El Salvador mega prison last month. His name is Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We had his lawyer on the program just this week. Just over a week ago, the White House admitted in court that Garcia's deportation was a result of an administrative error. Because, you see, back in 2019, Donald Trump was president during that time, you might imagine, he got protected immigration status, which meant he had an active order that he could not be removed or deported. And yet, he was rounded up by the Trump administration anyway. And after they admitted to it in court, they refused to do anything about it. Basically, their stance was, whoopsie, we made an oopsie. He's in an El Salvador Supermax. You'll never hear from him again. What do you want from us? Well, just about 2 hours ago, the Supreme Court weighed in unanimously. They now say that a district court, which previously ruled in this case, can indeed instruct the Trump administration to facilitate Garcia's return home. It will not be immediate, but the court says the White House has to start taking those steps. Now, because he's not in U.S. custody, he's in the custody of a foreign government, El Salvador, there's still a lot of open questions here. But fundamentally, the core issue in this and related litigation swirling around this maneuver the Trump administration has taken has been this. Can a president use the dubious invocation of a 200-year-old law, the Alien Enemies Act, which has only been used previously in wartime, to justify basically snatching anyone off the streets and then quickly shipping them off to a foreign prison where they will never be heard from again with zero due process? None. Now, to my mind and the minds of, I think, many legal observers, the answer to that question has always been flatly no. If the Constitution protects against anything, it protects against that. But it has been a matter of whether or not this 6-3 conservative Supreme Court would acknowledge that reality. Well, that's why tonight's such a big deal. Today's decision from the court is, at the very least, an indication that at a baseline they will, and it is very, very striking, there were no dissents here. The administration did not even get Clarence Thomas or Samuel Alito or Neil Gorsuch on their side writing in their defense. So to put it lightly, that is not very common from this court when it comes to high-stakes issue having to do with paying deference to Donald Trump. Leah Littman is a professor at University of Michigan Law School, co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast, along with Melissa Murray and my wife, Kate Shaw. She's also the author of a forthcoming book, Lawless, which is out next month, and you can pre-order now. Leah, it's great to have you on the program. I guess just this stuff gets very complicated procedurally, but what is your reading of this unanimous order from the court?
So it is good news. It's better than what might have happened, but I think it's far from perfect and it's far from over, because what the Supreme Court did is they left in place the portion of the district court order that required the government to facilitate Mr. Abrego Garcia's return. But they indicated that the district court needed to clarify what the court meant by directing the government to effectuate, i.e. actually bring about Mr. Abrego Garcia's return. And they suggested that the court might actually lack the power to direct the government to effectuate the return. So that creates this kind of liminal space. What's the difference between facilitate and effectuate? What can the district court actually order the government to do? Can the government come back and say, well, we tried, and El Salvador said, no, sorry, we won't return him? Would that be sufficient? And that's a sort of ambiguity that the Supreme Court's decision left open, and that I'm very concerned the administration is going to try to drive a truck through and, take advantage of that ambiguity to delay, if not prevent, Mr. Abrego Garcia's return. Yeah, I mean, we should say the district court judge here is Judge Boasberg, who has been the subject of a lot of... So this judge is actually Judge Zinnes. I'm sorry, this is not the Boasberg one. The Boasberg one is another, thank you very much, is another line of cases having to do with the Alien Enemies Act. This judge here had said, the district court judge had said basically, you have to go bring this guy back. Like, this is not right. You can't just say, nothing we can do. What do you want, Judge, right? So the Supreme Court basically says, rejects the argument by the Department of Justice arguing for Trump that, like, there's nothing we can do. They stop short of saying, you must bring him back. And they come down in the middle of, like, you got to try, basically. I think that that's right. And I think that's why we can't give the Supreme Court too much credit right now. We have to wait to see what they are actually going to do by way of enforcing the order. And specifically, are they going to allow the court to hold the administration's feet to the fire and actually prove what the administration has tried to do, and prove that doing other things might not be possible. Because the reality is that the administration negotiated an agreement with El Salvador. So El Salvador is detaining individuals pursuant to an agreement with the United States. And I think that makes it very likely that a single phone call from President Trump, the United States, could make El Salvador return Mr. Abrego Garcia. And the fact that they haven't done that already is appalling. And I'm very concerned that they are going to do what they have been doing in all of these other cases and try to obscure and obfuscate and go into court and say, well, we tried, and you can't inquire into that any further beyond our statement that we have tried and done the right thing. And unless the Supreme Court is going to allow the lower court to actually probe the administration's representations and to get them to prove that they have made their best good faith efforts to return Mr. Abrego Garcia, I think everyone should still be focused on this case and trying to convince, the public, the courts, and the country that this administration needs to ensure Mr. Abrego Garcia is returned to the United States.
Yeah, to your point there, I mean, in the other line of cases that have to do with Judge Boasberg, who was the judge who ordered those planes to turn around, and they didn't turn them around, and the president of El Salvador, Bukele, tweeted, oops, too late, and that was retweeted by Marco Rubio, and the whole kind of idea was like, no, you can't touch us. That I don't think it's a mischaracterization to say that the posture of the Trump administration in court has been one of truculence, insolence, like bordering on outright like insubordination in front of the courts about what the court can make them do.
I think that's exactly right. I think in any other administration, we could expect some good faith compliance with the directive to try to get Mr. Abrego Garcia's return. And I think we could expect them to give honest, straightforward answers about what they've tried to do and what is possible. We can't expect that from this administration, who walked into Judge Boasberg's court, and when the judge asked them, what did you do? Did you turn the planes around? What directives were given? All they said is, well, we complied with your order and we are not authorized to say anything else. And that kind of obfuscation could make it much harder for the courts to actually ensure Mr. Abrego Garcia's return. And that is what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, and we should just note here, there are enormous human stakes for Mr. Abrego Garcia, as well as other plaintiffs who are suing here, who are in a supermax prison under what I think really can only be fairly described as appalling conditions, with no means out, like at all, as far as we can tell. Men basically stacked like cordwood and, 23 and a half hours a day in captivity and not allowed to do anything. So these are very, very, very urgent questions for the individuals that have been sent there. Leah Littman, thank you so much for making some time in the breaking news.
Trump dialing up more tariffs to China, up to 145%. The 10% tariffs I mentioned, which are still in place, has begun to fuel even more of the fear and uncertainty that led to the market crashes, which had Trump backing off and retreating yesterday. If he were to retreat entirely, you wouldn't get back to zero, but you would get away from some of the worst problems. But he's only retreated partially, and the uncertainty is feeding this.
Stocks are selling off sharply again today as a new reality sinks in. And let's start with some numbers. 1,500 is about the amount of points the Dow is down right now. And of course, the biggie, 145%. That's the total tariff rate on China now.
After the historic rally we saw yesterday, the Dow tumbles as the White House says its tariffs on China are actually higher than what the president had announced yesterday.
The S&P down more than 3%.
Market sell-off is accelerating. Straight up yesterday, down significantly this morning. Janet Yellen, she says Trump's economic policies are the worst self-inflicted wound by an administration on a well-functioning economy. Markets down.
The worst. You were just watching Fox coverage. That's one of the Fox News channels, Fox Business, quoting the Wall Street Journal, which I'm going to read to you in more depth in a moment. But what you're seeing there is that some realities can't be denied. This isn't working. And as the Wall Street Journal emphasized, it didn't need to be this way. This is not one of those unpredictable or confusing market meltdowns that takes months to investigate because of macroeconomics. This is Trump. Trump, Trump, Trump. This is Trump policy. Don't take my word for it. I'm quoting the Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch, which is both a financial Bible and it leans right. And the editorial page supported basically Donald Trump's election. It is a turnaround from what was the initial excitement about him backing off it all yesterday. One report says the euphoria is fading, and any on-paper gains that appeared yesterday are getting wiped out again. The top 500 companies down another 3.5 points and down 6% in the last month. So you see the bit of relief yesterday, as we told you last night, didn't go anywhere near back to the economy that Trump was inheriting, and it's down another 3.5 points today. The Dow down over 2 points, down over 5 from the last month. Another way to say it, if you're not into all the charts, I'll put it like this. If Donald Trump just didn't go to work for the last 2 weeks, none of these $6 trillion mistakes would be happening. If Donald Trump just golfed for the last 2 weeks like he had when the crisis hit that he started, if he just golfed instead of messing with monetary trade and international economic policy, you wouldn't have these problems. There is a level of illogic here that you have to address. And it may sound unkind to say that a president and his entire policy are illogical or worse. We don't mean it as criticism or opinion. We mean that there is no logic to be found in what he's been doing, and the markets in this country and abroad are reacting. The Times reports on how Trump scaled back the tariffs. The real credit, Trump's advisors admit, goes to the bond markets. Mr. Trump's decision driven by, quote, fear. Fear, not strategy. Fear, not strength. This is according to the New York Times sourcing inside the White House and elsewhere, that the tariff scandal could turn into a, quote, financial crisis, unlike the 2 previous crashes of the past 20 years, which I just mentioned to you, that were complicated. The global financial crisis of 2008, fed by synthetic securities and real estate, and the completely uncontrollable pandemic of 2020. Unlike those, the Times writes, this crisis would have been directly attributable to only one man, Donald Trump. Now I'll go to the striking quote in Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal, which was read aloud on Fox. So Fox viewers and other conservatives are hearing about this, as well as able to check their own retirement accounts. Quote, Trump told advisors he was willing to take pain. He privately acknowledged his trade policy could trigger a recession, but said he wanted to be sure it didn't cause a depression. That's the Journal's financial reporting. Other outlets saying Trump blinked. While the chaos is not over. The market swings that are a response to Trump, the uncertainty which prices in choices he's made or refused to make, and the way that he has freestyled all of this improv to the very end, to the point that when they did try to stop the bleeding yesterday, you still had confusion on the White House lawn about which countries and which tariffs still applied, which doesn't give confidence even as they back off the worst parts of it that the market said, okay, thank goodness it's not this. But none of this is logical, and much of it is being announced inconsistently. That's not the secure guidance you want for the global economy. It also undercuts the few talking points that were thrown out on the right to try to make sense of the illogic. Look at the contrast between Trump allies yesterday claiming it was all a secret plan to back down without getting anything back, when the markets were a little relieved that it wasn't going as far as it could have, versus today's reality.
We begin with the art of the deal. Told you this was going to happen.
Trump announced a brilliant move to pause the higher tariffs.
Stocks after that announcement shot up on the news.
A huge win for the president, a huge win for the country.
It's genius.
The haters, the doubters, all the people on the left wing, they were all proven wrong. They all, as usual, end up with egg on their face.
That was last night. Who has egg on their face now? Who was proven wrong? The point is not to single out Mr. Hannity or anyone else making claims that are factually false if you just look at a week-long stock chart. The point is that the stakes are too high to do the usual political spin. Here we are, the market's plunging a day later. And then the timing. The Associated Press reporting Trump publicly urging people to buy online hours before he made the pause that he would, according to the timeline, appear to have known when he posted that, signing it himself, DJT. But that's also a stock symbol for his company. Quote, it's not clear if Trump was saying buy stocks in general or his stock, Trump Media, which did close up double the broader market. Remember all the talk about draining the swamp? Or the claim that having a businessman, high net worth president, whatever his exact wealth, he's richer than an average person who's done public service their whole life, that would somehow insulate us from this stuff. In fact, it looks like the opposite. He's got his own Bitcoin-style currency that he's been hawking. Elon Musk has promoted his currency while in office, but also in business. They recently held a Tesla demonstration at the White House. Tesla's been battered by all this. There are big questions, even amidst the priority of first stabilizing the markets, about whether corruption is seeping into what the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal agree is a Trump-induced crisis with the risk of being one of the greatest crashes in the last several decades.
Who knew in advance that the president was going to once again flip-flop on tariffs? And are people cashing in?
This could be an enormous scam.
There is just all too much opportunity for people in the White House and the administration to be insider trading, and you can't put it past them for a minute.
I'm very interested in what members of Congress have been buying and trading stocks in the last 24 hours prior to this tariff announcement.
Those are some of the questions that lawmakers are asking, so we're showing you the news of what they're saying. I want to be clear in fact-checking that there has not been any formal claim of insider trading against anyone. This is all happening fast, nor have the federal entities that are supposed to do this independently. They're not supposed to have any political bias. SEC and others are not saying anything about this. So we're not reporting on some new finding, but we're showing you serious questions lawmakers are asking. Wall Street is not calmed even after the initial kind of exhale that this might not go on as bad as it looked forever, because Trump did retreat a bit. But here's JP Morgan. They tell their own investors, we still think a contraction this year is more likely than not. And then I showed you the Wall Street Journal reporting, then the editorial board, which is a different part of the paper, of course. They're the ones that do endorsements and more politics. The editorial board says these moves are evidence markets believe the biggest threat to the world economy is Mr. Trump's tariffs. I'm going to leave that on the screen for another moment. This is the Wall Street Journal, as I mentioned, kind of a financial Bible. They're the sister outlet of Fox News. They care a bit more sometimes about financial issues than pure partisan politics. That would be the clear message today. Everyone in the White House, everyone around Trump can see this. This is still Murdoch's empire. And they are saying, I repeat, the markets think the biggest threat to the world economy is Trump's tariffs. That's just one view. Then you have people who do economics for an actual living and do it independently. So they're not just talking on behalf of, say, one company or the recession outlook. Predictions I've shown you from some of the top banks. The Nobel Prize winning economist, Paul Krugman, writing in his newsletter, destructive uncertainty about future policy has increased. And he can walk you through in plain English, which is one of the reasons he's a popular economist, not just a Nobel-winning one, what that uncertainty is. He dates it to exactly Donald Trump's choices, emotions, style of, or failure of leadership, and says the prices are only going up. There's also a market measure that tries to look at uncertainty. This is the volatility index. I'll put this in full for everyone. These are, of course, rough measures. But what you see here, according to many market analysts, to how Krugman references it, is a volatility that's going up and is a problem, not because of some uncontrolled international development, but because of how Donald Trump is leading or failing to lead.
All right, joining us now is founder and CEO of Independent Veterans of America and host of Independent Americans podcast, Paul Rieckhoff. Paul, I think you just heard us speaking with Ken there, but I want to ask you, are you concerned that the administration has essentially given the Army secretary two concurrent, apparently full-time positions? I've worked in D.C. a long time. I don't remember anything like this happening before, but hey, there's always a first time for everything.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the chaos is our new normal, and I think that's what's most concerning around our national security, around our law enforcement. But look, Kash Patel is an extremist. He's a culture warrior. He's dangerously unqualified, and it's actually good news for the ATF that he's been removed. If it was up to me, they'd remove him from the FBI as well, and our country would be safer. But in the meantime, you're asking a 38-year-old, relatively inexperienced bureaucrat to run the Army and the ATF, and there's a lot more chaos. There's chaos for the people who work at the ATF, at the Army, and throughout our federal government. And this has become the new normal. I think folks have been rightfully focused on the economic chaos that's happening this week. But we need to remember that during this week, the National Security, Department of Defense, ATF have all been continuing to experience chaos and leadership turnover. There's no continuity. There's no public visibility. And Kash Patel hasn't even been seen in the building. So for the rank and file, I think this is more chaos that should concern all of us.
I mean, that's a good point. The focus has been on a lot of economics, but the other branches of the government have continued to work and carry out the administration's objectives. Today in the Oval, Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said they've reached some sort of agreement over the Panama Canal. I want you to take a listen to the sound.
We're at the Panama Canal with their Southcom commander ships, F-18s, troops, and signed a couple of historic deals. One which is with the Panama Canal Authority, a framework for U.S. vessels first and free through the Panama Canal. Right. And then also a memorandum of understanding with their security minister for the presence of U.S. troops. Fort Sherman is an old U.S. base there, as well as their naval station and air station, jointly with Panama to secure the Panama Canal from Chinese influence. That's something you said, we're taking back the canal. China's had too much influence. Obama and others let them creep in. We, along with Panama, are pushing them out, sir.
So U.S. forces in Panama, that's, we'll go with controversial history, but what do you think might be required of the U.S. military under this deal?
I think that's a question for the Secretary of Defense and the President that hasn't been answered. We've seen this a lot where they spike the ball and they don't offer the details around what's going to be required, especially of U.S. forces. Look, it's better than an invasion, right? I mean, the tough talk they've been having lately around Panama and others makes everybody scared of an actual military conflict. So this seems to be a de-ratcheting or a de-escalation, at least, of the rhetoric. And maybe we can move toward a deal that helps American interests and brings the focus back on China, which is what Trump and Hegseth have been doing this week, which is a lot more popular politically. It's a lot more intelligent strategically rather than kind of spraying and praying across the globe. They're now focusing on China economically and militarily, which I think is the right place to focus if you're talking about the next 50 years or so and who's going to be our adversary. But the devil's in the details here, and it's often a show with big talk and not a lot of details, and that's what we need right now.
I want to pivot a little bit and also ask you, the administration says direct nuclear talks are underway between the U.S. and Iran. And Trump has said that a very big meeting will take place on Saturday. Look, I mean, not for nothing. Could this be a good thing if these two countries are talking again, get back into some sort of nuclear agreement? And what have you heard about this deal? What's your takeaway?
Sure. Look, I'm always hoping for peace and diplomacy here, and I'd love to see the commander-in-chief score a win here. But we also know he talked the same game on Putin and Ukraine. He said there was going to be peace there in a day or two, and that hasn't happened. So, again, it's a lot of big talk, not much on the details, and not much closure. So we need to know what's going to happen with Iran. How is Israel going to be involved? How are U.S. forces impacted? Any step toward diplomacy is a good thing as long as we're not compromising on our side, and that's where we need the details again.
All right, Paul Rieckhoff, thank you so much.
I want to bring in Faz Shakir, advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders and the executive director of More Perfect Union, and Brendan Buck, former press secretary to House Speaker Boehner and Ryan. He is an MSNBC political analyst. And so maybe we talk a little bit about the House Speaker. And I'm just wondering, Brendan, what you take away as this moment for Speaker Johnson?
Well, obviously a huge day for him, and credit to him for getting this over the finish line. This is, I think, the fourth time where they've gone to the floor on big votes, whether it was the Speaker vote for him or the bill to fund the government earlier, or the first time they had to pass a budget, and they didn't know they had the votes, and they went to the floor, and that's a pretty risky gamble, and they pulled it off every time. So credit to him for getting to this point and having the budget step behind them. At the same time, they haven't really solved any of their problems. They have a huge gulf between the House and the Senate on levels of spending, and I know that they've spent the last few days trying to smooth that over with conservatives. But sort of talking about it through rhetoric is very different than when that gets put on paper and people actually see what they're looking to cut. I couldn't help but catch the Speaker spent a lot of time talking about how they're not going to cut Medicaid, and then he was asked for a single example of what they're going to do, and he had to go immediately to Medicaid, because that is the largest pool that they can work from. And you can talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, and there certainly is that in Medicaid, but making that go away and writing into law something that is going to root that out is not quite so simple. So soon they'll be needing to put some things on paper. You'll need to people will have a better understanding of what the impact will be on certain programs. And it may be the case that some of these numbers aren't quite as high as some of the conservatives want. So a big day for him, but I think we're still a very long way from having resolution on some of these vexing issues that I don't even know they've even really started to try to fix.
And Brennan, real quickly, a budget resolution that was adopted is essentially an outline or blueprint. There is no real detail in this.
Oh, that's right. And the House and the Senate put two different outlines, and I think that's what a lot of conservatives were about. The House put pretty aggressive targets that they said these committees need to hit in terms of spending cuts. For example, $880 billion out of the committee that oversees Medicaid. On the other hand, the Senate has set themselves up with very low targets, and that's the frustration from a lot of conservatives. The Senate has basically said anything will go. They've set the targets so low. The problem for conservatives, the Senate instructions, the Senate targets are the only ones that really matter under the procedure we use in the House. So you've got a lot of conservatives saying, I don't trust that the Senate is actually going to come through with the level of spending cuts that we want. And you saw Thune and Johnson come together today and try to give those assurances. But there's a simple reality that the level of spending cuts the House is demanding are just not going to fly with a lot of senators. And when that final bill comes back from the Senate, or at least through a negotiation, and it's nowhere near as aggressive on Medicaid, for example, you're going to have a serious vote problem at some point. I'm not saying they won't get there. I think they're going to have to figure this out. This is one of those must-do things, and so they will get it done somehow. But those targets there's a huge gulf between those targets, and I think conservatives are going to be very troubled when they see what the Senate is able to swallow.
Yeah, and fast, and just thinking about, the Speaker saying essentially elections matter, and that the Republicans were given the House, the Senate, and the White House. But it's just in the Senate, Faz, it seems as though there will be some differences and some substantial differences. How do you see that?
Well, you just take Medicaid, and agreeing with everything that Bren was laying out about the math, high level of deception there from Speaker Johnson about the math that would be required to cut that much in Medicaid. In his own district, you have well more than a third, something like 34% of people on Medicaid. There's other Republican districts. Yeah, Senator Sanders is going to Bakersfield, California this weekend. That's David Valadeo's district. 67% of those folks are on Medicaid. And, you heard Speaker Johnson say something like, well, these are kids who are on video games, and you get out of the basement. And if you look at the people in his own district and in California, these are people working at McDonald's, working at Walmart, working at Tesla. If you look at the stats in California, in the Central Valley, there are a couple thousand of people who are working at Tesla, owned by the richest person in the world, on Medicaid. And these are the people who they want to cut health care from. So I think it's going to be very, very challenging. It should get very, very challenging for them. There is a populist revolt going on in this nation. We're going to do everything we can to metastasize the fight and defeat Speaker Johnson's efforts.
And so, the Speaker, I think twice said, we're not going to touch essential elements of any of these social programs. And Faz, I want to just get your thoughts real quick on the issue of the tariffs. Hasn't part of the Democratic platform for years been supportive of tariffs? I mean, what should Democrats now be saying?
Yeah, President Biden executed tariffs for purposeful intent, targeted tariffs to say we want to create jobs in certain sectors, electric vehicles, solar panels, chips production. And they had strategic design. They said, hey, I want to build these jobs in America. When Trump came along, he says, I'm going to wield this baseball bat and wreck the economy. Blanket tariffs all across the board with no strategic design or purpose or intent. In fact, when you look at the arguments he's making, you say, oh, it's for fentanyl, it's for illegal immigration, it's for external revenue service, it's for trade imbalance, it's for all kinds of purpose and creating jobs. No, it can't be all of those things. What strategic design or purpose do you have? And as we saw from these numbers, there is no. They've literally come out with numbers that don't make any sense to anybody. But to your point, Jose, you look at when President Biden was in charge, we had targeted tariffs that work. They can be utilized effectively and help grow jobs in America. But Donald Trump is certainly showing the way about how to do them ineffectively.